Is there anything harder to pull off than the cartoon revival? I gotta say, no. These things are very, very difficult. Often they'll get the team back together, attempt to recapture the magic, and then fall flat. No matter how hard they try, 9 out of 10 times these things fail. And one of the biggest failures I can think of is All Grown Up, the revival of Rugrats. Now here's a little bit of a hot take. I'm not really a Rugrats fan. Now don't get me wrong, I don't hate the show. Not at all. In fact, I acknowledge it's a good show with likable characters, inventive scenarios, and clever writing. I can't really put my finger on it, but it's just not something I really enjoy. I've tried again and again and again to get into this show, and I've never been able to. But that's a can of worms for another day, maybe another video, but hey, that's not what we're here to talk about. What we are here to talk about is the fact that Rugrats, before SpongeBob, was Nickelodeon's big thing. Everywhere you look, toys of Rugrats, books of Rugrats, advertisements for the new episodes of Rugrats. It was insane. But according to a lot of fans that I've talked to, when we got to the Rugrats movie, things kind of fell apart. New characters, different writing style, more focus on poop jokes, and then it became a show that didn't know when to die. It kept going on, and on, and on, purely because the network couldn't let it go. They felt that if they kept on trying, they would recapture that magic and rekindle the spark. Kind of the same thing that happened to the Fairly OddParents years later. One of the most obvious attempts to recapture the audience was reviving Rugrats as a spin-off where they're all grown up. Instead of being babies, Tommy, Chucky, Phil, Lil, and the gang would all be preteens, going on preteen adventures. On the surface, this doesn't sound so bad. I actually could see a show about the Rugrats babies, again all grown up, living their day-to-day lives. But that's where everything falls apart. It doesn't act on that premise. I'm gonna tell you exactly why I, as a non-Rugrats fan, think that All Grown Up is a terrible show. First off, I may not know a lot about Rugrats, but I do know one thing. These characters that are presented here, Tommy, Chucky, Phil, Lil, these aren't the same characters from Rugrats. That's understandable though, they were babies in the old show. They're gonna grow up, they're gonna develop personalities and so forth. But here's the thing, they still had personalities as babies, and yes, they could grow up to be more developed people, but you'd expect them to be at least similar. With the exception of Angelica and Chucky, I can't recognize any of these people. I wouldn't expect any of them to have these personalities. You know what their personalities are? Tommy wants to be a filmmaker, and that's pretty much it. Lil is a girl, Phil is a guy. Dill is slightly odd, but really is basically the same thing as Phil. Kimmy is a girl, and Susie is a girl. That's really it. Nobody has any defining personality traits. Tommy got off lucky with being interested in movies. But when you take that away from him, he's just a dude. I can't see anything that separates the characters between each other. Basically, their gender defines their character. And trust me, that does not make them any more interesting, considering the fact they're all clones of each other with different voices and different looks. I did mention that Angelica and Chucky were different, but that's not a good thing. Angelica's the typical, I'm so much better than you, I'm like totally fabulous Valley Girl annoying brat. And Chucky is the whiny neurotic nerd. Just because I can imagine them growing up to be like this doesn't make them interesting. The thing is, they never take the characters beyond that. They're the stereotypical archetypes that every single teen sitcom uses again and again and again. Can you see the main problem here? All Grown Up takes a show that was known for its creativity and inventive scenarios and utterly dilutes it, turning it into every single teen sitcom you've seen on Disney Channel or Nickelodeon. Nothing different, except that it's animated in the classic Cupo style. Again, even as someone who hasn't seen a ton of Rugrats knows that this barely has anything to do with it. When I think of a show about the Rugrats characters grown up, What I thought it would basically be the same thing as the original show, but matured a little bit. You know how in the original show the babies would always misinterpret something that the adults say, and then go on these wild misadventures in their imagination based off of it? I was thinking that All Grown Up would kind of be like that, albeit probably with not as much imagination thrown in. Let's face it, they're 12 years old or so around this time, and this is kind of an important part of your life. I'm not talking about a puberty sense, we don't need another big mouth, trust me. But this is where a lot of people start finding out who they really are. Granted, most of that happens in high school, but this is where it all begins. They're very awkward years where you're trying to find yourself and find your passions. Your life starts getting shaped in ways that you can't even really pick up on at the time. It's also an interesting time because you start finding your passions, you start finding your way in life, but you don't really know how the world works yet. You're still young. Your head is full of all these ideas that, odds are probably never gonna happen. Take me, for example. When I was the age of the kids and All Grown Up, I thought I was gonna be the next big YouTube star along with my friends because we made these terrible videos called Leo No Arms. Trust me, you're not missing anything. If you would have told young me that he would have grown up to be a government worker who does YouTube reviews on the side, his head would have exploded. There could have been a lot of inventive scenarios done with this. Look at Tommy, for instance. The one character trait he has in the show is that he wants to be a filmmaker. He could have had, maybe a similar journey that I did, making pretty lame, terrible things, but they're all meant to gain experience, even though he doesn't really know it. Someone could be overly ambitious with what they want to do with their life. Someone could be so focused on their middle school priorities that they don't pay attention to what comes after, high school, college, or careers. And I know they would have gone there too. All Grown Up tries to take itself seriously. The only problem is, when they do, we get either lame episodes like TP plus KF, or they turn it into a big joke, like the episode where Chucky gets addicted to trading cards. Although I will admit, the latter was actually pretty decent. But the rest, not so much. Every time they try to take this stuff seriously, it turns into gushy, annoying soap opera drama. It's not interesting in the slightest because all it is whining. Yes, I get it. Kids around this age tend to be whiny and resentful. However, that still does not make it pleasant for the audience. It actually makes it quite annoying. In fact, when you grow up, you tend to want to forget all those little petty fights or hormone-fueled rages you have. That's because, more often than not, they are ridiculous and embarrassing. And that's really all this show is, too. It's either watching these dull reimaginings of these beloved children's icons doing boring things like trying to get their grandpa to stop making a fool of himself at a water park. Or it's about them making mountains out of molehills and whining and complaining and blah blah blah. Sadly, the latter is how I got introduced to this show. And the whole Rugrats franchise, admittedly. When I was younger, my parents and I went to go see my aunt in Birch Bay, Washington. It was a pretty uneventful visit, but I do remember that my cousins and I were watching Nickelodeon, and every single commercial break, they would have a commercial for this episode where Angelica turns 13 and the popular girl's having her party on the same day! What a horrible travesty and an original concept that I'm sure everyone's gonna be completely enamored with. Even as a young child, I thought that this was pathetic. So naturally, when it came on, I decided to watch it. And I was not impressed. I thought it was boring. I didn't like the characters or any of that. And sadly, for a little while, that tainted my view on Rugrats, because I thought that's what it was. When I was a little older, I decided to give the real show a try, and I had the same opinion that I do now, and every other time I watch it. It's a decent show, it's just not for me. But every time I try to get into Rugrats, I also try to watch All Grown Up. While I have the same opinion on Rugrats every single time, my opinion on All Grown Up gets worse and worse and worse. As someone who doesn't watch Rugrats, this show is boring and melodramatic. But even then, I appreciate Rugrats. I acknowledge that it's a very important show when it comes to both Nickelodeon's history and really children's animation in general. It's because of shows like this and Doug and Ren and Stimpy that we got the big animation renaissance in the 90s. Shows like Samurai Jack, Billy and Mandy, Jimmy Neutron, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly OddParents, and many more never would have happened if Nickelodeon didn't take this big risk by giving creator-driven cartoons a chance. All Grown Up is a slap in the face to that. Never once did I imagine that these kids would grow up to basically have a personality-ectomy. I'm really surprised that this was made by the same people that made the original. It is completely out of touch. It feels a lot like, say, Powerpuff Girls 2016, where a bunch of executives think they understand what made the original popular, but they don't. All they understand is, but the chart says, and excuse me, I gotta go wash my mouth out with soap for quoting the Nostalgia Critic. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Another point I gotta make is, pay attention to the theme songs of each show, because they tell you exactly what you're gonna get into. Rugrats is quirky and full of synth music, setting up the wacky situations that the babies are gonna get into this week. Full of fun, quirky adventures. All Grown Up is a generic pop song that's catchy in the worst way. It's memorable, but it's not enjoyable. And like the show itself, it's pitifully generic. And sadly, this is kinda what killed off the Rugrats. Sure, they had that Angelica and Susie's preschool days or whatever, but we don't really count that. That barely even aired as is and only lasted 4 episodes. But this was a clear indication that it was over for the Rugrats. People had moved on. SpongeBob was the next big thing, and even then, Rugrats was now beyond saving. If All Grown Up was, perhaps, a bit more developed or more in tune with the original show, maybe it could have done something to save the struggling brand. Could have brought in a whole new audience or even brought back old viewers who've grown up but now are adults and can appreciate deeper themes and values. And those are things that Rugrats has never been afraid of doing. Look at the Mother's Day episode, for instance. But no, it opted to be its own thing, forgetting about the original, and sadly, in doing so, forgot to actually be interesting along the way. Now that's my take on it. If you want to hear an actual fan's take on it, I'm gonna have my editor and renowned Rugrats fan, Billy HL, give a short opinion piece on All Grown Up. Take it away, Billy HL. What do you think of this show?
This show is garbage. Like, no exaggeration. This show is hot garbage. See, I may have a fondness for horror movies and anything relating to dark media, but I still have a soft spot for the shows that I grew up watching as a child. And Rugrats is definitely one of those that really seems to stick around with me for more reasons than you probably think than simple nostalgia. While it may not have the lasting impact as other shows, like, say, Jimmy Neutron or Phineas and Ferb, I still find myself going back to Rugrats simply because of the innocence of the whole thing. Like, very rarely do these kinds of shows work, especially when given the idea that these aren't really kids, these are infants. And it's honestly quite refreshing because we ourselves don't really remember our own pasts as babies. It's practically impossible. So seeing a show like this that actually takes advantage of it in somewhat of a, I wouldn't say realistic, but extremely intriguing approach to becoming universal with such a simple concept. I think that's the lasting power that Rugrats had. It felt different. It wasn't something you'd seen before millions of times like All Grown Up. And honestly, they could have done the same thing here. Although, to be fair, some people prefer this show over Rugrats because, it's more relatable. The characters are more developed. Oh, you kidding me? These are just chumps. Like, they're not characters anymore. In Rugrats, the infants are more like real characters. These are people you might actually freaking know. Like, they feel more real than these supposedly more real interpretations of these characters. Like, and really think about it though. The original characters all had these active imaginations and somehow were able to communicate with each other, without biting each other's heads and crap. But No, now we got this crap and All Grown Up. They're basically just stale, bland insults to these, like, very well-written characters. What kind of mentality is that? I'm sorry, but I don't get it. Yeah, and I guess the excuse is, oh, but it's a spin-off. It doesn't really have to follow the original. Well, that's true, but the problem is, it also has to work on its own. And if this show doesn't work on its own, and is basically the same crap you see on other, like, networks and other shows, and hell, you could already see this crap with As Told by Ginger. You could already watch that and get the same experience. And I'll admit, like, that's actually a pretty good show. Because, you know, it actually knew how to develop characters and really take advantage of the animated setting and really have, like, a truly unique spin on what you could pull off in children's animation. And, well, I feel like All Grown Up is just a way for Nickelodeon to vent. To vent in the fact that they lost chances on getting the Proud Family and getting slaughtered by the Weekenders. Well, maybe not so much the latter, but, you know, I just want to mention that show again. That's my stance on this whole thing. May not have been a crazy tangent, but I just wanted to let something out.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that, everyone, aside from that little bit you just heard there, is a non-Rugrats fan's perspective on All Grown Up. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What do you guys think of All Grown Up? Are you in the same boat with me, where you kinda like Rugrats, but you also don't, and you acknowledge it's good, but you don't know why you don't like it? It's weird. Or do you have any shows like that? Because I'm honestly interested in hearing about it. So as always, comment below and let me know, because I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you guys next time.